I remember very clearly an experience that I had in the early days of my Christian walk. I was in the car, in the passenger seat, as my friend was driving along, who was also a Christian, and we pulled over. I was very emotional, I was very down, and I broke down in tears. And I will never forget what I said to him. It really is a very shocking admission that I made. But before I get to that, it's interesting to note that many people, when they come to Christ, they have this great emotional experience, and then oftentimes they will reminisce about how they've never been able to recapture that, and the joy of the Lord has grown colder in their life. For me, it was the other way around. I didn't really have a huge emotional experience, but the joy of the Lord increased over time, and even into some very dark suffering that I went through that I never imagined I would have had to have gone through in my life. In the early days of my Christian walk, I was a very different person. I was still very worldly. The focus was on myself. I had a lot of financial goals. I was reading a lot of financial books, which in and of itself isn't a bad thing, but that was my focus, my primary focus. I was reading a lot of self-help books back then. I remember I was even into The Secret. I remember that one of my goals was that I'd wanted to have a Ferrari by the time I was 27. That's the type of thinking that I had. That's what I cared about. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to have an attractive girlfriend. All of these worldly things early on in my Christian walk. And I blame a lot of this. Certainly the reason that this would continue on for as long as it did, on the preaching that I was hearing in my former church, which was really seeker-friendly, man-centered rather than gospel-centered preaching, which lacked any sort of conviction or any really exhortation or admonition to live the Christian life in a way that is dying to self, surrendering and pursuing God for His sake, finding Him to be the absolute joy and treasure, and allowing that to transform out of the place of relationship and everything flowing from that. I experienced that over time. And what's interesting is that as I did over time, it took a long time, because it wasn't until I actually found preachers that were preaching this way, until I understood my Bible more, because I wasn't getting this in church, that those desires that I had as an early Christian just faded away into the background. All of a sudden it just seemed ridiculous. Why would I want a Ferrari at 27? Why would I ever want a Ferrari? An expensive piece of metal. That money could be used for so much greater purposes. But anyway, that's a bit about my journey. But at that particular time back then, I remember I was in the car with my friend, and we were driving along on one evening. We were going through the hills, the winding hills of Adelaide, and I was just feeling really down. I just felt like I needed to talk. I needed to open up to him, and I'm glad that I could have a friend that I could open up to and be vulnerable with. And we ended up pulling over in a spot by a creek along the side, and I just broke down in tears. I was so overwhelmed. It's not easy for a guy to cry in front of another guy, but it just shows how overwhelmed I was. And this is what I said to him. I said to him, I feel more empty and depressed as a Christian than I did before I came to Christ. My life is no better, I remember saying, as a Christian. That's a pretty shocking admission. And it all came from that place of, I thought Christianity was going to give me the things that I wanted, that it was going to meet all of my wants and needs, that now that I'm following God, He's going to make my life happy. He's going to bless me with these things in my life. Before, if I didn't have these things, well, there was no expectation there. I was upset. I was disappointed. But I thought, now I've got God. He's going to bring these things to me. He wants to make me happy. But I didn't realize that God is not so much concerned about my happiness, certainly in a temporal sense, as He is concerned about the state of my soul. And that often has to be refined through much suffering. And then obviously over time, as I said, my perspective completely changed. And I recognized that God is my treasure. I recognized that the Christian journey and the true freedom and liberty comes to dying to self and living to Christ. It's so backwards to what the world teaches, so counterintuitive. But God faithfully led me to that place. And now I feel like I have everything in terms of I am fulfilled, I am whole, I have a peace and a joy despite still immense suffering with chronic illness and a brain injury from protracted withdrawals and isolation and all that sort of stuff. But sadly, a lot of people remain in that place, and this is why I'm so passionate about preaching the true gospel to people and often speaking against that seeker-friendly gospel, which is so damaging to people. I actually did a video where I exposed the teaching in that particular church and showed why it is man-centered, not gospel-centered, and talked about some of the dangers of that. I'm going to put that up on the screen. It's a longer video. It's about 25 minutes. I break down 3 of the sermons in parts, but it is a really great resource. If you want to check that out or add it to watch later, you're really going to enjoy that. Leave your comments on this video. I would love to get your thoughts. Has anyone experienced a similar thing to me? Would love to hear what you have to say, and I'll talk to you very soon. God bless you, brothers and sisters.